Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sam Roberts Wrestling Podcast. Introducing your host from New York, here is Sam Roberts.
Let's all welcome Mick Foley back into my life. There's that sound.
There's that sound. It accompanies me everywhere.
Star.
When I can't get the real audience reaction, I make up my own.
Good. Well, that's the spirit, isn't it? That's everything. Star of I Am Santa Claus, I would say.
Well, it's an ensemble piece.
Yeah.
I'm not the heart and soul of the music. I may be the feel good part.
I mean, I have to tell you, there was a couple moments. I was lucky enough to see the big New York City premiere.
Thank you for being there, Sam.
Of course. But I went with my wife, who's not a wrestling fan whatsoever.
Right.
But that's my kind of how I figure whether or not something's successful, because I'm like a lot of wrestling fans. You may get frustrated at times because wrestling fans will tend to just tell you whatever you do is brilliant.
Yes, and they're predisposed.
Yeah.
To liking it. Oh, Mick's in here. I like him. They want to like.
I'm gonna find the good in whatever this is.
Yeah.
But like that's why I keep my wife around to be like, because she'll tell me if something's boring.
That's the only reason you keep your wife.
That's it. Just to find out if Mick Foley's entertaining or not. That's all I need.
What was the report?
It's my Foley gauge. It was I was looking at her while the movie was on because I didn't want her to be polite to me.
Yeah.
I saw her get teary-eyed at two different points.
Let me guess. When Santa Jim is talking about realizing that he is part of people's lives.
Yep.
That his portrayal of Santa makes him unknowingly part of people's lives. And the second teary part, maybe during the Foley Christmas Eve visit.
That's right. I know you didn't want to say it because it would have been a hurtful no, but absolutely, it was the end. It was the Foley Christmas visit.
Well, that's not necessarily. It might not be a tear inducer, but it's definitely a huge smile inducer, and it's so.
Yeah.
Listen, it's my movie, and as we talked about on Opie and Jimmy's show, there's been a backlash within the Santa community, largely, almost entirely from people who have not seen the movie. One or two people went to the Hollywood premiere and thought it took away from the magic, and thought that kids would.
I was going to ask that because, from your years in wrestling, kayfabe.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And when you first started, kayfabe meant a very different thing than it does now.
Sure.
Is there a Santa kayfabe?
Not there. Well, it's a strange world, and it reminds me so much of professional wrestling. I'm not saying it's a bad world. In a lot of ways, it's a wonderful world because everybody's trying to do their utmost to do what's best, which is spread joy and perpetuate this iconic figure of Santa Claus.
Yeah.
There are guys who are traditionally bearded Santas who put on a beard, and they think they're doing the job best because they're not putting kids in a situation where they're seeing Santa anywhere but in a Christmas setting. But I've been around the real bearded guys, and it doesn't matter if there's 6 of them having breakfast at Denny's, or in the case of the International Brotherhood of Real Bearded Santas celebration in Tampa, where there are literally hundreds of guys. Kids come to the celebration. We did a big blood drive, and it's like, see if you can spot the real Santa.
Mm-hmm.
And not one kid walks out of there going, I don't believe I saw 300 guys. I mean, they gravitate towards the guy that seems like the real deal to them. And so one guy, during the Hollywood premiere, it was his first year, wearing the red suit, but a longtime seasoned storyteller. He said, why would you put out
and this was a traditionally bearded Santa?
No, this is a real bearded Santa.
Real bearded
Why
Santa.
Why would you put out a movie that exposes the magic? I said, It's not exposing the magic. I said, first of all the ways that kids can find out. Watching a 90-minute R-rated documentary is going to be really, really low on that list. Almost every kid. I can't prove this, but I'm a pretty, I have a pretty good feeling for how things go down. Kids are going to be bored. If they're 5, 6 years old, it might be funny for Santa Russell to be cursing for 5 minutes, and then they're going to turn on a cartoon because they're going to see it as boring. For a kid who does sit through there, most of them are going to come to the conclusion that my Santa, real name, legal name, Santa Claus, is the real guy. And I think for kids who are not in that magical age, for adults, they come out like that one guy did. I met a couple on the elevator going to my hotel, which is in Midtown, and they liked my festive, attire. Not the same festive attire. This is day 316, consecutive days wearing Santa-themed attire.
I was afraid you were going to say of wearing this T-shirt.
Not this exact T-shirt.
Mick.
Last night I had a beautiful, custom-made, embroidered red corduroy Santa vest. And the woman remarked on how festive it was, and I said I had a documentary that was premiering. And so without any knowledge as to what the movie was about, they knew it was a Santa-related documentary, but I had no idea who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And they showed up. And during the Q&A, I asked if they might have, I'd be interested in hearing their feedback. And what the man said, and I think this is going to be kind of universal, he said, I had no idea people were so passionate about their work as Santa. And I think that's what guys are missing. Guys who are in that world, who are in that bubble, they're going to look at the negative.
Yeah.
Which is we show these guys as real flesh and blood human beings who make mistakes just like everybody else. I think to the outside observer, they walk away and they might think a couple of guys are a little crazy. My dear friend Santa, and legally changing your name to Santa Claus is a commitment.
Yeah.
Russell is a little bit cantankerous, but lovable.
Right.
Santa Jim is either the nicest, warmest, most beautiful human being you've met, or the devil, depending on how you feel about homosexuality. And I'm kind of the jolly guy. I think it'd be hard for someone not to like me in that role because I'm the first timer with stars in his eyes.
Right.
But that's
especially after everything that you've been through, to still find this avenue where you have stars in your eyes and you're like, wow, look at this world. This is amazing.
Yeah, I loved it, man. As a dad, I'm glad. And you know my family a little bit.
Yeah.
The older kids more so than the younger kids. But to see my kids having one of the greatest moments of their lives, and then if you look closer, you're like, you know what? But that guy, the big guy with the beard, he's enjoying it more than anybody else. And so I would put that. I mean, and I'm not putting down any of the Rankin Bass classics or Miracle on 34th Street or Elf. No way am I going to put, but I'll put that scene at my house on Christmas Eve up there with the most touching Christmas scenes you will ever see in cinema.
It will. I mean, and it's at the end of the movie. I don't want to spoil everything or whatever, but it's this moment where, and you start, and it's perfect, and it's real life because half of it's filmed on your son's video camera. But it's like this perfect cinematic thing where you go, "Oh, goofy Mick, he thought his trick would." Oh, wait a minute!
Yeah.
Wait just a minute! But it sounds like too. You're making a little bit about the kayfabe comparison, but the reactions that you were getting from the people who were saying, well, we didn't know that people were this passionate about it. We didn't know anybody took it this seriously. It doesn't sound that dissimilar from reactions Beyond the Mat got.
No, and that's what attracted me to the project, and that's ultimately what I was writing to some of these guys saying, listen, I was in this, when I say the guys, there is a world and a community on Facebook and on the internet.
The Santa people?
Really upset about the movie. The fact that there is a movie exposing, the
business.
The business. And I tried saying, listen, Mr. McMahon to this day does not like Beyond the Mat because he thinks it takes away people's ability to enjoy the magic. Mm-hmm. Almost everyone I've spoken to has, it's almost universal. They walk out of that experience, whether it's in a theater or on their DVD or on cable, and they go, I had no idea. Like, they walk out and they have so much more respect for the guys than they did. And I feel like this movie accomplishes the same task, that Santa is not something that you resort to. That
right.
Santa is something you aspire to. It's something that these guys look forward to all year. And there is some sadness, like, our cast of characters revolves around, there's Santa Bob, who has everything, I would say, in proper perspective. He says it's number 3 in his life, behind his religion, behind his family, and then there's Santa, and he's very content to be a well-compensated Santa at an upscale mall 7 weeks out of the year. My Santa, he wants to be that guy,
but he can't drop that Long Island accent.
No, he cannot drop the
Santa
Long Island
with
accent.
a thick Long Island accent.
Thick Long Island accent. I will say, because the tradition of Santa Claus came from the Dutch Sinterklaas, who brought it over to New York with them, that he can fit through that loophole that, to me, Santa would be a New Yorker.
Okay.
He would be in New York
because that's where the Dutch came.
You'd have trouble. Yes.
Yes.
In New Amsterdam.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have trouble trying to sell that notion to the Southern Santas who believe that they've got it down right.
Of course.
Or Richard Attenborough, now deceased Richard Attenborough as the English Santa. But
Right.
one of the wonderful things about that world to me is that Santa is whoever you see him
Mm-hmm.
as being.
Do you think, because your obsession with Christmas and Santa, a healthy obsession,
A healthy one, yeah.
has been well documented. But as I was thinking about it just last night when I was watching the movie, do you feel like the more, because like the wrestling world can be pretty negative at times and political and, especially that coupled with the violent style of wrestling you became accustomed for as you got more and more violent and as things kind of, that world became
physical.
more and more.
I'll say it got more and more physical.
Physical.
I won't use the V word, but it got physical.
As that world got
extremely physical.
kind of uglier and uglier, shall we say, did you fall more and more into the Santa world in your personal life?
Yeah, I did.
Just to kind of get this sanity?
I would retreat because it was, I'm, not trying to start the violins here, although if you have a soundtrack, it might be a good time to fire them up. But, I would come home.
For another tearjerker moment?
With each passing year, it was getting harder for me to get around. And the price to pay for entertaining people in the way that I chose, it was higher. And so I needed that retreat. When I came home, I wanted to be as far away from that world as possible. And obviously, these moments I had as a child at Christmas time meant a lot to me. And the moments that I spent with my kids at Christmas were things that I wanted to expand and celebrate throughout the year. And so I wanted to have a part of that Christmas magic with me year long.
Did you get frustrated that, especially at the time, wrestling fans couldn't really grasp the fact that you wanted to separate yourself from that because it was your everyday? I think it's the same thing everywhere. I don't really want to talk about what goes on the radio everywhere I go. There's other things that are going on in my life.
It's funny because, my Twitter account, especially for a guy, I'm still obviously in people's minds, I'm still associated with WWE. I don't have a contract, but I'm always going to be a WWE guy.
And it seems like also as you've separated more and more, you've been able to start watching the product. You have opinions.
I watch the product. Yeah, I can. I'm very honest with my opinions. Sometimes
Yes.
I believe it's always appreciated.
Really?
I believe they look at it, and I believe they take my opinions into consideration.
Even when you threatened to smash your TV?
I did smash my TV. Yeah, I think they realized that I was upset, and they did respond. And Triple H said, "Mick, as an author, you should know not to judge a book by its cover." And I said, "All right, I'll be looking forward to seeing how the story ends." And I said, "You want some guy to go on?" And
you were like, "Hunter, my book was about me, and I was on the cover. You can sometimes judge a book by its cover."
But going back to what you're saying, there are what I was trying to say is I've got a pretty large following now on social media.
Yeah.
But I've got two accounts, especially being not a guy who's out there in the on a weekly basis with the hey, follow at Real Mick Foley. Pretty large following, and it grows by a few thousand every week. Whereas my alternate account at Foley is Santa loses 100 followers a week. So I'll check,
Wow.
and I'll just say to my daughter, "Look, another 100 people dropped me," and she goes, "Why?" I said, "Because I think it's pretty clear. They're like, okay, we accept that you love this,
Right,
but
we're
we're not going to take that ride with you." But now that it's November, and now that I think people are realizing he's been wearing Santa themed clothes for 316 consecutive days, that's not going to drive people to theaters.
Mm-hmm.
It may not even induce them to purchase a DVD. But I believe when it shows up on Netflix after Thanksgiving that people will check it out and they'll see the same passion that I put into. I think it's far more inspirational to see somebody, displaying equal passion for something than going through the motions at something they used to love. And don't get me wrong, I still love wrestling. I was on a few weeks ago. I was on Raw. It was a highlight for me to come out. And
what was it like a few weeks ago when you were on Raw? Because I was watching, and you've said in your books and everything that there are moments where you go out there for the paycheck, and then there are moments where you really went out there.
Yeah.
And it felt like it was a real Mick Foley.
It was a good moment, and I was in a position where we were about to have the world premiere of I Am Santa Claus in Hollywood, and I got the call from WWE, and we were scheduled to do Kevin Smith's podcast and Mark Maron's podcast, and for a guy like me, a performer, whether you call me a comic or a spoken word guy, Mark Maron's podcast is
huge,
a big deal, and to give that up in order to do a spot on wrestling was not a decision I made easily. Kevin,
is that what you had to do?
Yeah, Kevin, thankfully, he attended the premiere with his wife, loved it, which meant so much. When he's there, you're on his podcast, and he's explaining exactly why it was a great movie, not just the storylines, but about being beautifully shot and the score. I mean, my first reaction to him was, Kevin, you just kind of made me feel critic-proof. And he joked, apparently you haven't seen some of my reviews. I said, no, not that. I said, the fact that you got it means that it's there to be gotten.
Right.
And so no matter what anyone else says, my initial gut reaction internally is going to be, Kevin Smith liked it. He knows more about movies.
Probably the same way in the comedy world when Judah Friedlander is like, yeah, you're on the right track. You're like, I'm going to listen to that guy.
Yeah. Not a few of those. Yeah, those other guys. You need those people who are going to be brutally honest with you.
Right.
But to tell you, hey, you've got something, you should pursue that. So when this Raw offer came in, honestly, if it had been something where they wanted to be on a panel or in a backstage vignette, I would have said. And my initial reaction was, I'm sorry, I'm doing press for a movie. And then I thought about it. They told me the role. I was like, man, that's something I want to do. Like, because it's the best scenarios in wrestling result when everyone wins. And I knew I would be in a case where I could come up with my own verbiage, and where I had a chance to be out there in a surrounding that people associated with me with the cell, and
using your own verbiage is not like something to scoff at. This day and age, that's not something that happens all that often.
Yeah, it doesn't happen all that often. If I'd been, and I was really thankful they didn't hand me a bunch of stuff. They just had ideas of where they wanted me to go, and I said, this is what I'd like to do. And then I said, listen, if this goes correctly, my goal is I want to put Dean over Ambrose. I want to put Seth Rollins over. I want to put the stipulation. I want to put the cell itself over, the match itself over. And if I do all those things correctly, I'll get over simultaneously.
Yeah.
But the goal, honestly, and I've got faults, but when I'm out there and I've got that microphone in my hand, I think I've got everything in the correct proportion. Which is, if I do my job right, I'll get over by extension. And then once I walked out there in that ring, it was like, it felt special. It felt magical. It didn't feel, not that there's anything wrong with being the guy in a funny vignette, but I walked out of that experience saying, you know what, I can do this. Even if it's once a year, they know that they can call me on the phone and I'm going to deliver for them. And so I will have to think, next time the phone rings and says, hey, we want you to present an award at the Slammies, you know what, I might do it. I probably will. It looks now like WWE Network is going to be producing, the my special.
Oh, that's great.
And that will immediately put to rest all those questions. What does he do? What does he do? You've been at my shows, and I'll ask people, say, anyone have any idea what I do? And it's like only 5% of the people. And the fact that, there's a buzz going around, the fact that, people are showing up, putting down their hard-earned money on an unknown entity like my show in a tough economy is showing a lot of faith.
And as far as like your shows go, and I will say this without blowing smoke up your ass, it's a really difficult thing to do, to combine pro wrestling and entertainment, because they're almost two separate worlds. Like, people either like pro wrestling or they like everything that's not pro wrestling.
Yes.
And I've interacted with every comic ever. I've seen every comic you can imagine, and I've also seen every wrestler you can imagine.
Yeah, right.
But there's a big difference. Like, I went to Caroline's and I saw the Iron Sheik roast, right? And it was like the fans that were there for wrestling did not want to hear any of the comedians.
Right.
The fans that were fans of comedy were like, what are these? What's like New Jack doing up there? He's just kind of rambling and saying wrestling stuff. You have figured out a way to still incorporate wrestling, and so the wrestling fans know, and actually tell stories and I used my Mick Foley gauge, I used my wife to do something that's entertaining. Like, regardless, it's an entertaining story.
And it's funny because I'll look out at the audience and I'll ask if anyone's brave enough to admit they're not a wrestling fan or brave enough to point behind their wife's back. And I'll say, you're going to have a better time than you're expecting. And
are you on high alert to watch eyes glazing over? Because I feel like as somebody who watches wrestling and has watched wrestling forever, like just in normal conversation, like I have to know little words where it's like, now you've passed it. Like now you've lost whoever you're talking to.
No, the look I really cherish is about the 10-minute mark, and it's almost indescribable, but I'll just say it's a look of relief and like this look of pleasure where they realize I'm having fun. Like I was not counting on this. And in some ways, well, they don't realize now they can no longer hold this evening over their husband's head for the next 5 years. They go, I went to that Mick Foley show with you. And they enjoy because there are stories about interesting people. And I know going in, like, some of my stories are going to involve some grisly injuries.
Right.
So if I don't create an atmosphere of warmth, then I'm just a guy telling gross stories. And so I try to make people care about the people in the same way. And I'll jump into the Santa thing and why it appealed to me. But in the same way that I took great pride in the fact that there were moms who would pick up my first book, have a nice day, and go, okay, I wonder, it's great that Jimmy's reading. I wonder what this is. And go, I can't put this down. This is a really good
I don't even know how aware of it. I feel like that book became the book for wrestling fans to give to their girlfriends. Like, no, I know you don't get it, but here, read this. It'll explain.
And I think I'll go on a limb and say, I mean, the wrestler to watch for people who don't like, and not just for the outrageous stuff, but I think in a weird way, like the women, like they sense, like, he's sensitive,
right.
I like him. Like, I can get caught up in his problems, whether they're fictional or not. Like, he makes me feel like I should be supporting him. And that's what I love. That's what I love about the movie I Am Santa Claus, is that you don't have to be a Santa enthusiast, to...
I think the movie actually works in the opposite way. Like, the fact that you guys made it R-rated, the fact that you kept it honest and real. Like, you have Santa cursing, you have Santa drinking, you have Santa... You're talking about Santa's sex life, whether he's a gay Santa who's going to a bear convention or a swinger Santa who's got to get past these stereotypes. Like, it's like, okay, this is actually interesting stories about these characters. You know what I mean?
And completely unexpected.
Right.
And then in the end, I give a lot of credit to the director, Tommy Avalone, and his producers, Derek Linderman. And if you don't mind, I'll pat myself on the back a little bit there because... a lot of that jolliness that comes together in the last 20 minutes was stuff that I was very hands-on for, even to the selection of, a jolly old St. Nicholas for the theme song. Is, you're working on a low-budget documentary.
Well, and I was going to say, because I've heard other people talk about low-budget documentaries.
Yeah.
And you watch them and you're like, okay, yeah, I can tell that that's a low-budget doc.
Right.
But this one, like, some of this, you must have just figured out how to spend money smartly, because you've got WWE footage, which can't be cheap. You've got legitimate music. It doesn't look like it was filmed on camcorders. It was actually filmed on something professional. Like, when I was watching this movie in a theater, it wasn't, they must have rented out the theater and they let them play this. It was like, no, this is a movie that could be conceivably shown in a theater.
They got a lot of bang for their buck. When it came to WWE, because they were a publicly held company, they had to charge us for the footage.
Right.
And at first, I thought the charge was a little extreme. And I went in, I talked to Kevin Dunn, the head producer, and I don't want to, I don't know if Kevin wants me saying this, but when he watched the scene at Christmas Eve, Kevin was wiping away tears from his eyes. And I'm like, geez, Kevin, you're a guy in a production truck for 20 hours a week. And in another 60 hours a week, he's about an 80-hour a week guy. Like, we're in the business in some way. I don't mean this negatively, of manipulating emotions. That's how you get people enthusiastic about the show. And yet we had him, clearly touched. And he goes, I'm sorry. He goes, but I'm a father, and that's real. And so we worked out a deal that worked for both of us. We're going to work for the shareholders, where they weren't giving it away for free, but it wasn't as much as they'd asked for. At one time, somebody wanted $25,000 for a Frankie Valli song, and we were able to get it, for $500.
Wow, that's some shrewd negotiating.
Dee Snider, fortunately, Dee's a good friend of mine,
Yeah.
and we were able to get his version of "Deck the Halls" for a pittance. We're using songs in the public domain.
Right.
But so in the case where there's magical transfer, and it is magic when I transform, it's like it's almost like movie magic, but it's a real transformation with the bleaching of the beard. We had Carol of the Bells. Carol of the Bells is a public domain song because it's so old, but you can't use Mannheim Steamrollers. Carol of the Bells. So we had our own guy create the music, like a guy
Gotcha.
creating the score, original songs. Jolly Old St. Nicholas works perfectly, but we can't use the Chet Atkins version. So we had to come up with our own version. And we had this amazing guy, Toothpick, who had written songs for Morgan Spurlock's Super Size Me, coming up with original rap songs for Santa's Barbecue. And I agree with you. Like, I see the money. I know these guys skimped, and that's why the one notion that really bothers me in the Santa world is the idea of, you guys do anything for $1. And it's like, these guys worked on this for 3 years.
Yeah.
They slept in airports. They traveled with 4 people, in an economy car. Like, they cut corners everywhere. Even my bleaching scene is done in a $55 motel room. Like, every dollar's on that screen. And
Right, to make sure it looks like there was money
they
spent
did
on
an
it.
amazing job. There's, claymation. It's a really
And it's
well
good
made.
claymation.
Yeah. And that's what Kevin was saying. He was pointing out it's beautifully shot. The claymation, the songs, it comes together. So even if you're somebody who's personally offended by one of our Santas or by the material, to dismiss it as a piece of a blank movie is wrong. It's a good movie.
Let me ask you were famous. You famously said before that you, at one point in your career, didn't want to be the guy who pulled a sock out of his pants. And then you realized that you transitioned. You're like, you know what, this kind of works. So we go forward. Is there any part of you that's like, well, if I become Santa, does that shadow the sort of death match, Hell in a Cell, or do you want that
You
shadow?
guys see me shaking my head? Not at all. And I have WWE Network partially to thank for that. Like, my legacy is
Cemented.
secure.
Yeah.
Someone wonders why there's no wrestling memorabilia in my house. I'm like, I've got something that reminds me that I was a wrestler. It's called waking up in the morning. And I'm approached, and I don't mean this in a bad way. Like, every day somebody mentions things to me, and it's funny. My kids will be walking with me, and there's only so many ways that you can answer somebody talking about Hell in a Cell. But then,
and it's still the first time I interviewed you. You said that this was the one question you get asked all the time.
16 years, and now more than ever. You live with it. It's like Adam West. You better learn to live with it and love it, or else it'll haunt you. But my kids will be walking through an airport, and some guy will just go, as he's walking by, he won't say, "Hey, can I take a pic?" He won't start up by going, "I know you're with your family, but I hate to do this, but
I don't mean to be a bother,
but
right."
But a guy will just go, "Thank you for everything you've done," and I'll say, "You're welcome," and I'll walk away, and my son will go, "You like when people do that, don't you, Dad?" And I said, "Yeah, it's always nice to be appreciated," and so I get that every single day. And Dee Snider, who I mentioned, was kind of, along with J.J. French and the other members of Twisted Sister, were nice enough to give us Deck the Halls for almost nothing. He said to me, we feel a certain kinship. D, he dressed in the drag. He was a he's a badass. He had to get a bodyguard once we started making money to prevent him from leaping into crowds and beating up unruly fans. And Dee said, he goes, "Do you find that what you did in the ring makes it easier to turn around and do things that are kinder, that might be considered more sensitive, that guys that didn't have our background might have trouble doing?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I have no problem, when I was a commissioner, and there's a guy wearing a Mick Foley St. Mick T-shirt. How cool is that? I had no problem when I was a commissioner in 2000 being the nerd,
Right.
being the least tough guy in the room because everyone who'd watched me knew that I had the background.
I was also thinking because you did Opie's show and Vic Henley was busting your balls, and that's part of being in the stand-up world. Stand-ups bust each other's balls,
Yeah.
but is there any part of you normally stand-ups are busting each other's balls because they can't fight? You know what I mean? Like the reason that I make fun of people is because I can't fight anybody. So is there any part of you, like, does that click in at all that you're like, I'm the king of the death match, god damn it, who are you talking to?
No, I did get a little aggravated there. Like
yeah,
I did.
like, you
I
know
understand
what I could
it.
do to you?
I understand it makes for good radio. I
Right.
thought he went a little excessive on me there.
Right.
I was obviously a new guy. I didn't know the light. I didn't know how to put 7 minutes in a light at 5. I didn't know that. Fortunately, I'm in a position now where I don't need to know that because I do my own shows and I can go as usually as long as I want, and I love that freedom. But the fact that I was showing up for free at the comic strip, and the fact that I was showing up at my local clubs, Governors and McGuire's in Long Island, like one of the other guys going, hey, can I do 6 to 8? No money, no mention, and that's where you really cut your teeth. And you cannot appreciate the good times until you've had a couple of those absolutely disastrous moments. I mentioned to Jim Norton before I left the show. I said, "Yeah, I remember what you told me about." He did Shane and Vince McMahon's Shane's bachelor party.
Yeah,
as a new comic who tanked.
Yeah,
and it's painful to tank. It's painful in a way.
I would imagine, especially in front of the McMahons.
In front of the McMahons. And it reminds me so much of being an independent wrestler where every match is your most important match. And if you screw up, you may not be able to redeem yourself for weeks. When I was in WWE, you have a bad match. You're like, you know what? I'm going to redeem myself tomorrow. When you're a guy out there and you don't know when your next gig is, whether it's a comedy event or a wrestling show, it's like you live with that failure for weeks and it eats at you. And so I'm glad I went through those. So now when I'm on stage and I'm comfortable, I can much better appreciate the fun I'm having because there were some times that were absolutely miserable.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, and you have to. It's like you can always the people who come straight to WWE, for instance, without having to really pay dues. At some point, that thing clicks in. It just doesn't last. There's not.
And I feel bad for those guys because there is no territories to learn your trade. There's NXT, and they're doing a wonderful job with developmental, and the guys go out there and they work their butts off in the independent scene in order to get noticed. But I was so fortunate that I went to Memphis, or I did not enjoy myself. I was there for 4 months, and I went to World Class Championship Wrestling out of Dallas for almost a year. And in Dallas, you hit your angles on Saturday morning TV so that you could do your Friday night TV in the Sportatorium, and whether your paycheck depended greatly on how well you pulled off those. There was literally money on the line.
Right.
Not much. I wasn't making much, but it was still that.
So am I getting dinner tonight or not?
That if you did well, you would see that Friday night show would increase. And guys, in a lot of cases, haven't had the chance to find their own characters. They're making their mistakes on the big stage instead of making them in a TV studio in Memphis or the Sportatorium in Dallas, or when I worked for Continental in Alabama. I had a lot of chances to mess up badly with very few people watching, so that when I finally did get on the big stage, and I'm talking about not just WCW in late '89, and then through '93 with a year and a half hiatus, and through '94 with a year and a half hiatus in between. But when I showed up in WWE in '96, I felt like I belonged there,
right?
And I felt like I had earned the right to to go to bat for myself. And if I thought something was a bad idea, I would voice it. I was diplomatic.
But you need to have that confidence. Where I know what my value is.
Yeah, I know what I'm capable of.
Yeah.
And guys are coming in. Unfortunately, it's tough to develop that when you've only got a few years under your belt and you're just happy to be there.
Yeah.
And so, Mr.
And plus,
McMahon,
and I would imagine when you're in NXT and you're getting all these opportunities, we've got this whole facility, it must be getting pounded in. Be thankful that you have this, because most people don't have this, and that's that mentality that doesn't necessarily breed confidence.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation. I know we're getting way off the shameless self-promotion of I Am Santa Claus.
That's right.
The movie I'm here to talk about. But Vince is big on grabbing the brass ring.
Yeah.
But the guys there in NXT, they become almost like a family.
Yeah.
Because they're there and they're training, and it's hard to be that guy that says, no, I'm going to be better than everybody else. Let me grab this for myself.
You kind of have to be willing to pull the rug out from under somebody if you have to.
In a sense. I was lucky in that I had a unique character, and if I had a real strength as a wrestler, it was that I gelled well with almost anybody.
Right.
And if I did a good job, everyone was going to benefit. That was what hopefully I brought to the table. So, like, you'll see something on Twitter, and they'll say, like, I think Mick Foley was the most important opponent for The Rock and for Triple H. And I like to think, when any of the guys sit down, they go, all right, who were the most valuable people that I wrestled? Like, who was I better off for having been with? That my name would show up on that small list of 4 or 5 guys that were instrumental in their development.
And I guess that's the legacy. Let me ask you about Hell in a Cell. Did you watch the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view recently?
Yes, I did.
What do you think? Because I'm watching this pay-per-view, and I'm reading on Twitter, everybody on the internet is obsessed with this idea that WWE can't tell stories, especially in a cage, without blood. I'm of the opinion that you can do it without blood.
Yeah.
But so you think that you just need to find more creative ways to tell stories?
Yeah, it makes it more difficult.
Sure.
It does. But I thought people are jaded. They've seen a lot, especially the long-term fans, who watch every week and been doing it for years. They've seen a lot. Guys are really, people say to me, you guys really put out in the Attitude Era. It's like, no, these guys are really putting out too, and in some ways, even more so, because a few developments. Everyone has short hair. They're in high definition. Yeah. Everything has to be in there. And when you remove like some of the extreme measures, you're also, in a way, taking away the shortcuts. And
right.
So the matches are extremely physical, and guys are working just as hard, if not harder than ever.
Yeah, because you have to convince somebody that this chair shot is the most devastating thing without it hitting my head.
Yeah, and so now, I look, and now a guy uses a chair across the back. All right, everyone knows that stings. But in order to make a statement, now they use it 12 times. And I'm looking, I know what hurts and what doesn't. And when they start going to the shoulders, and that's where you start chipping bones in your elbows. And I imagine that a lot of the guys are suffering for their art. And I thought both of the cell matches delivered. I thought Triple H and John Cena had an excellent cell match.
You mean Orton?
Yeah, I'm sorry. John Cena and Orton had an excellent cell match, especially given how many times they've been in the ring together.
Yeah.
And I think I reposted this article, I don't know if it was from Cage Side Seats, I think it was Cage Side Seats, talking about the fact that more people aren't talking about Seth Rollins and Ambrose in the cell is a good sign, because people didn't like the inconclusive finish, but I know that one of my greatest matches was against Shawn Michaels at Mind Games, and at the time the knock was it had an inconclusive finish. And it's like, guys, I was in control of 26 minutes and 57 seconds of that match. Don't blame me for the other 3. And those guys worked their butts off, and the fact that they went on last, they were the main event, and that they were accepted as main event pay-per-view wrestlers was a huge moment in both their careers and for WWE.
And I did read people saying, but a Hell in a Cell match is supposed to be conclusive. And I was like, did you see the first one? The very first one had interference in it.
Yeah, that's right. That was a classic.
It was a great match.
Now, the cell match with The Undertaker could not have been any more conclusive. Like, there'd never been a more clear. But I was going to say there'd never been a more clear-cut winner, but at the same time, we both walked out of there.
Yeah.
I limped greatly with the help of 2 other people, but I did not go on a stretcher.
And that damn Terry Funk did get involved.
He did get involved. But it was clearly a moral victory, and that was kind of an anomaly in the sense that you'll never have something like that taking place again.
So as you're trying to move on with your life and like appreciate the things that you really appreciate and get involved in Santa life and all this stuff, when your daughter Noelle becomes this like super WWE fan, like one of the biggest WWE fans I've ever seen, are you going like, I can't get away from this stuff?
My daughter is a fan who has fans. it's so surreal that when I walk out of the Barclays Center, they chant Foley's daughter, and and she's a striking young woman, and she's 6 feet tall without heels, and she's funny, like people are drawn to her. I'll tweet something out. I've got my 1.15 million followers. And then she'll tweet something out similar, and she gets almost as many retweets as I do, which means she's got like a loyal following. And so she's going to be successful in something. I'm not sure what it is. And in the meantime, she's just such a great person to hang around with. Like she loves hanging around with her.
Do you patrol her social media for creeps, though?
I understand there are some out there,
Yeah.
and that kind of comes with the territory. And then, for every person who's going to say something unnecessarily mean about me, there's going to be somebody's going to say something ridiculous about her. But the truth is, my younger kids have a YouTube channel, and the feedback they get is so brutal. It's almost inhumane. I know it's mostly kids their age taunting them, but the fact that there are some adults out there, it's like, why I was like, kids, why do you even do this to yourselves? They go, no, we're okay. So
but they kind of get it.
They kind of get that these are people, like what I'll say in response to somebody, a troll, is I'll just say a direct message them, because I don't want to retweet it because that's what they want.
Of
and
course.
Say, what a sad, pathetic life you must lead. What a limited hand in the game of life you've been dealt, that this is a highlight.
Yeah.
That being blocked is your goal. Congratulations.
Congrats, you did it.
Goal accomplished. And then you just go on some of the, they look and you just see these things, and it's just going out of their way to make other people's lives
and it's all they do
a little less enjoyable. And that's like, the Santa movie shows some greatly flawed people who find a way, to emerge in that red suit with the best part of themselves.
And I'll tell you this again about that Foley moment at the end of the movie. It reminds you, in this world of like internet hate and this and that, it reminds you that, wait a minute, it feels good to watch somebody feel good. Like these kids feel great. Now I feel great. And look what's happening.
Yeah. And then at the end of the movie, and this was a battle I had with the director, and ultimately I think he was right. I wanted to go home on the high note.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, but to be true to the movie, we have to bring it full circle. We have to show the loneliness, on Christmas Day. We have to show, the not the despair, but the depression facing our Santa when he realizes the gig is up.
You got to get
the
to the
high,
low.
and we could have gone home, but that would not have been accurate.
Right.
And when we see Santa Russell, I don't want to give away too much of the movie, but he takes that long, lonely ride on Christmas Day, and thank goodness for Dee Snider's Deck the Halls. As once we end the movie, we hit the afterword, and it's everything's jolly again.
Well, listen, I support anything Mick Foley does, but everybody should be with me on this. Go see it's probably the easiest way to see the movie is on iTunes. It's I Am Santa Claus. It's also on Blu-ray and DVD. Mick Foley aside, highly recommend it. And Morgan Spurlock has attached himself to it.
Screening it for Morgan the day after WrestleMania meant that I stayed up, let the kids go out, let them enjoy themselves. I hung out with Huey. I didn't sleep at all. At 5 a.m., I went to the airport, and then I screened the movie with the director, Tommy Avalone, just for Morgan. And talk about a harrowing. It's like having Mr. McMahon watching your independent matches, And here's my match, and having him watch like Morgan was for the first 5 minutes, and then when he saw Santa Jim taking photos in the bathtub or the horse trough with the chickens, he started tapping his feet, and I looked at Tommy, and the feeling was he knows we've got a movie here.
That's excellent.
And so we've impressed a lot of very important people, and it is above and beyond a story about Santa. It's a story about people and how they strive, to be their best despite difficult circumstances.
Well, you do have a movie, and everybody check it out. Mick Foley, thanks for hanging out, man.
Thank you, Sam.